All right, let's take a look at this reading more closely. The Prophet and the Age of the Caliphates, the Islamic Near East from the 6th to the 11th century by Hugh Kennedy. And we're looking at this chapter, The Matrix of the Muslim World, the Near East in the early 7th century. And this is going to be a closer look. So the first sentence here, the Near East before the coming of Islam. The sentence reads, the Near East before the coming of Islam was dominated, as it had been for the previous half millennium, meaning 500 years, by two great empires, the Roman Byzantine to the west and the Persian to the east. So we're talking about the 200s, 300s, 400s, 500s, 600s. Now the Roman Byzantine is one empire, it's the Roman Empire. But by the 300s, it had two administrative centers, one in Rome and one in Constantinople, what is now Istanbul. And after 476, Rome and likewise Tunisia is captured under the rule of these Germanic-speaking powers. But the eastern side, Constantinople, which controls Greece, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, is still surviving. And it comes to be known as the Byzantine Empire in the 500s onwards. So the Roman Byzantine Empire is one empire in the 300s and 400s, but after 476, the eastern half survives. The western half falls under the rule of different Germanic language people, including the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. So the Byzantine, the word Byzantine refers to the eastern half based in Constantinople. That Roman Empire back in the 300s was dealing with a conflict with the Persian Empire based in Iran and Iraq, also known as the Sassanian Empire, Sassanian. This means that in the days of the early Islamic empires in the 600s, the powers in the region, in the Middle East, in places like Syria, one power was the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantines, also known as the Byzantines, based in Constantinople, that controlled Syria and Turkey. And then on the other side, Iraq and Iran was under the rule of the Persian or Sassanian Empire. It says here in the next sentence, the frontier between these two empires had fluctuated considerably during this time. This means that the Eastern Roman Empire and the Persian Empire were at war with one another, especially in the Syria-Iraq region. In the last period of stability, and let's come back to that. In the last period of stability before the upheavals of the 7th century, in the late 6th century, the frontier line had run. Anyway, so it talks about the frontier there. Let's jump down to some interesting names. On the Euphrates, so around Syria, it talks about the Byzantine fortress of Zenobia. So it's Zenobia, we talked about who Zenobia was. Zenobia was a ruler of Roman Syria back in the 200s when the Roman Empire was one empire, and Rome controlled Roman Syria. It's only really in the 300s when the Romans decide to build up Constantinople as a second capital. So Rome is controlling Syria, but Zenobia, this ruler there, whose name in Greek means servant of Zeus, she also had an Aramaic name, al-Lugha al-Aramiyya, also called today Suryoyo, Syriac, Bet Zebai, the daughter of Zebai, and there were Arabic speakers in the kingdom and the region that Zenobia ruled. She was one of the many women rulers of the region. Palmyra, like Petra in Jordan, Palmyra in Syria, these were the northern two northern tips of the Arabian trade routes going down into Jordan and the Hijaz, the western region of Arabia, what is now Saudi Arabia. So they still remember who Zenobia was for hundreds of years after her, because Zenobia actually rebelled against the Romans and established her own Palmyrene empire, which was pretty sizable. It went all the way into Egypt. So it just talks about the frontiers. Let's look at some of these names here. Down here it talks about the Arab Bedouin tribes, the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids. That's the Banu Ghassan, Banu Lakhm. These are Arabic-speaking, semi-nomadic Bedouin Christians. You still have Jordanian Christian nomadic Bedouin people in the 1900s. Litwail family, for example, outside of Madaba. Much of that family now lives in Amman, the descendants. The Banu Ghassan, Banu Lakhm, these were older Arabic-speaking Christians in Jordan and Syria. They ruled the region, but they were allied. The Banu Ghassan were allied with the Romans, and the Banu Lakhm, closer to southern Iraq. Remember, Syria and Iraq are borderland. They are bordering countries, bordering regions. The Banu Lakhm were allied with the Persian Empire. At some point, all these Arabic-speaking Christian tribes and their territories, like these border regions, get absorbed into the Roman territories, the Arabic-speaking Muslim territories, Islamic empires. This reliance on pastoral, it says here, this reliance on pastoral peoples. Pastoral are people who live off of the land and their nomadic animals, sheep, camels. This reliance on pastoral peoples for the defense of the empires testifies to their growing importance. Their meaning the pastoral peoples. Testifies to the empire's growing importance along the desert margins and the inability of the settled people to provide their own defense. This language in English is not very clear. In the 600s, in the year 600, the Byzantine Empire presented a superficial picture of ageless continuity. Again, another high-level English sentence that is too academic. The emperor of the day, Maurice, bore the title of Augustus and claimed to be the successor of the first Augustus. All right, so the Romans are basically still around. It says here at the bottom that Latin was being replaced by Greek for administrative purposes. So after the fall of Rome in 476, which again, Rome, the western half of the Roman Empire includes Italy, Spain, Morocco, Tunisia. The western half is under Germanic language rule in the 400s. After that conquest, the Vandals were already in Tunisia, another Germanic kingdom. They were already into Roman Tunisia in the 300s. After that fall of the western half in 476, the eastern half, Greece, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Greek in the 400s was already an important language of learning and education, but the Greek ends up being used as an administrative language for the Eastern Roman territories and pushing out Latin. So it says here that the Eastern Romans are still around. They called themselves the Romans in the 600s, but it says here that there were changes. So this impression of continuity masked a large number of changes in the Roman Empire was continually evolving in response to changing circumstances. So it gets into the story of how some of these cities were very wealthy, talks about architectural activity, but it's saying here that by the 6th century, meaning by the 500s, there were political problems, financial problems, and the empire was losing money. The Eastern Romans, the churches and monastic buildings, monasteries like in the mountains were still being made, but there were problems here in the 6th century, meaning the 500s, blows to the urban culture of late antiquity. So late antiquity is like the 300s, 400s, 500s, including the bubonic plague. So these are health issues. 541, the bubonic plague struck the Eastern Empire for the first time, but by no means the last time. It was to recur with horrifying frequency throughout the 6th and 7th century. Remember that the 6th century means 500s and the 7th century means 600s. This was where, again, there was a move of many Eastern Roman doctors who were studying Greek medicine, and as part of a larger Greek curriculum of learning, which included like physics, engineering, science, philosophy, ethics. Many of those philosophers had moved over to the Persian Empire in Iran and Iraq in the 500s because there was some censorship that was developing in the Eastern Roman Empire of ancient Greek texts, because the ancient Greek scientific texts in the time of Christianity here in the 500s, the ancient Greek scientific texts included a lot of references to ancient Greek religion. So there was some censorship of ancient Greek religion in the Greek-speaking Christian world of Greece and Turkey, Eastern Roman centers, Egypt in the 500s, and so many of those doctors had moved over to the Persian Empire in Iran and Iraq. This was where, in the time of the early Islamic empires, in the 600s and 700s, especially Abbasid Baghdad in the 700s, this was where the Islamic empires were inheriting population, the learning traditions of medical learning because you had generations of doctors already living there who knew Greek texts and Greek science. Mortality, it says here, is impossible. So this is where medicine in Abbasid Iraq was very sophisticated, and the hospitals were very sophisticated. The hospitals were called bimaristan. Mortality is impossible to gauge with any accuracy, but using contemporary accounts and comparing it with the much better documented Black Death of 1348 onwards, it seems probable that at least a third of the population was lost. So basically, there's a picture here of massive mortality, death in the Eastern Roman cities. When you're in the desert regions, you don't have as much contagion of these diseases. And so here in the urban populations, you have health issues. But the nomadic populations, as you move into Eastern Roman Syria, down into Jordan, and at this point you're at the frontier outskirts of the Eastern Roman Empire, these nomadic regions were less affected by these health issues. And so there you see there's no evidence of plague in these regions. This massive loss of population was compounded further by a series of disasters. So you have like earthquakes. Apparently earthquakes destroyed Beirut even. So this is Eastern Roman Lebanon in the 500s, next to Syria. Until then, a flourishing intellectual and legal center and other cities on the Lebanese coast. Many of these cities in Lebanon are famous Roman cities originally, like Saida Usur in southern Lebanon. At the same time, the Persians launched a series of destructive invasions of the Syrian provinces, including the sack of the great city of Antioch in 540. Antioch is now on the border of Syria and Turkey, and it's called Antakya. In 582, in Turkish, Antakya. In 582, the major provincial capital of Bostra in the Hauran region, which is where one of the, in the 200s and 300s, one of these emperors, Philip the Arab, came from Aurantis, which is Hauran. In 582, it was sacked by the followers of the Ghassanids, the Banu Ghassan, protesting at the arrest of their chief by the Eastern Roman authority. So the Eastern Romans and the Banu Ghassan, Arabic-speaking Christians in the 500s, were actually starting to have some problems here. These incursions were paralleled elsewhere, these Persian invasions. In Italy, most of the lands that Justinian in the 500s, based in Constantinople, had painstakingly retaken from the Visigoths. So the Visigoths were based in Spain, but they also controlled part of Italy in the 500s. Justinian, Eastern Roman, had taken back a lot of Italy on behalf of Roman heritage, Roman administration, taken Italy back from the Goths and recentered the empire in Constantinople. But at this point, the Lombards, another Germanic people, invaded from the north. And this is around the time in the 600s when you're beginning to see the Franks are taking over, are in control of what is now France, the Frankish kingdom. The Balkan provinces were devastated by the attacks and settlements of the Slavs. So this is where you're beginning to see people who speak languages similar to Russian coming from not Eastern Turkey, but Western Turkey. Then you have Greece. So north of Greece is where you get like Croatia, Serbia. So coming from basically the northern coast of Turkey, that's the Black Sea there. This is where across from the Black Sea, northern coast of Turkey on the Black Sea, on the other side of the Black Sea, further north, that's where today you have Russia, Ukraine. So around the Black Sea, coming from the north, if you look at the map, you go westward and south, you'll get into these kind of Serbia, Croatia, Bulgaria areas. These are places where the Slavic language people invaded, and this is where today, if you go to Romania, they speak an ancient Roman language, similar to Italian. Romanian is in that region. You have Bulgarian, which is like Russian, and then there are Turkish speakers in that region, in Bulgaria. These catastrophes had a fundamental effect on the Byzantine Empire. It weakened the military, so it talks a lot about the military devastation. Let's go to the next paragraph here. Syria and Egypt had a number of problems. Roman Syria, Eastern Roman Syria, Eastern Roman Egypt in the 500s. Language and ethnic identity. So these were regions where Greek was a language of learning. However, it's beginning to talk about the fact that the locals actually at home did not speak Greek. There were these spoken language in Egypt, Coptic, which is a descendant of ancient Egyptian languages, which was over time people switched to Arabic in the Islamic Empire. Aramaic, which is the Lugha al-Aramiya, Suryoyo today, Syriac, and also called Turoyo, was spoken in places like Syria, Lebanon, and then Arabic was increasingly being spoken in southern Syria, Jordan already, that stretches into the Arabic-speaking regions of Western Arabia, southern Iraq. So the locals, so in Eastern Roman Middle East in the 500s, including Egypt, so that northeast of North Africa, Greek was a language of learning, but the locals in Egypt spoke Coptic, locals in Lebanon spoke Aramaic, then the locals in Jordan and southern Syria were speaking Arabic. This means that there was a kind of cultural gap between Greek-speaking Eastern Roman capital of Constantinople and the local languages of the farmers and smaller towns and even the cities. The local household language was often not Greek. And this was where you begin to see some problems in terms of religious differences. Constantinople, what becomes the Greek Orthodox Church in the Eastern Roman capital of Constantinople in the 500s. The Greek Orthodox, at this point, they're just called the Eastern Church of Constantinople. They use Greek as a language of the household, Greek as a language of learning, Greek as a language of religion, but they are managing these the Eastern Roman populations in Syria and in Egypt, where the locals are following their own varieties of Christianity associated with what is now the Coptic Church, the Syrian Orthodox Church. And back in at some point, these churches were kind of all united. But in the 400s, just before Rome fell to these Germanic powers, Rome and Constantinople had decided that the Middle Eastern churches, including the Coptic Church of Egypt and the Syrian Orthodox Church of Antakya, Rome and Constantinople decided in the 400s that these churches, the Coptic Church of Egypt and the Syrian Church of Antioch, they were no longer part of the Roman Christianity of Rome and Constantinople. And so from the 500s onward, you begin to see more and more Greek priests, Greek Orthodox priests, being sent to Alexandria in Eastern Roman Egypt and Syria and Eastern Roman Syria to build Eastern Roman churches there in competition with the local churches. And this is where you began to see some fighting among the priests from between the Middle Eastern churches and the Greek Church of Constantinople in the 500s. And it talks about the details here that are not important at the moment, but the Diophysite and Monophysite views, etc. These debates about the nature of Jesus. Remember that way back in the 300s, these churches had already expelled the churches associated with Bishop Arius, because Bishop Arius was having disagreements about this idea of the divinity of Jesus. Says the differences of theological opinion would probably have remained a talking point among theologians if they had not reflected the broader cultural distinctions. So they might have it might be kind of like a bookish type debate about the nature of Jesus, but at the end of the day, these local priests in Egypt were using Coptic language, and the priests in Syria were using Aramaic language, and the priests in Constantinople were using Greek. So there were these cultural differences there. And this is where you begin to see that here it says here the Syrian church had supporters like the Banu Ghassan. And this is where you begin to see the Arabic-speaking Christian tribes that were formerly allied with the Eastern Romans. They begin to now become more politically independent. And this is where it becomes a topic of discussion, where the Islamic conquests are at some point negotiating with these different churches about the kinds of political independence that these churches would have from Constantinople. So all very interesting. And then it continues to talk about how the Eastern Romans and the Persians began to continue their fight and struggle against one another at a political level. So these religious differences inside the Eastern Roman Empire in Syria and Egypt were making problems worse for the people in Constantinople. This is where you begin to see some of these Lebanese churches, like the Maronite Church, emerges around this time. It says here that the Sassanian Empire of Persia in the late 500s was still, and so here it just gets into the fact that the Sassanian Empire was following their own religious traditions. This is not as important, but here it says here, the Sassanians had their own religion. It's the Zoroastrian religion, and they follow they believe in this concept of Ahura Mazda, the good God, and but they really did not require their population in the east, in the Sassanian Persian world, especially Sassanian Iraq, where there were a lot of Christians associated with another church called the Church of the East. Now, the Church of the East Christians today are split into two: the Chaldeans and the Assyrians, Kenis al-Ashuriya, Assyrians and the Chaldeans of Iraq come out of this Church of the East. Those are the Christians of Iraq under the Sassanian rule, and they were not required to follow the religion of the ruling circles. So pretty interesting. It just gets into some of the images there. The Persian Empire controlled virtually all of Iran and Iraq. And here is where it says that the Sassanians were allied with the Banu Lakhm of Hira. And this is the region of southern Iraq moving into Arabia, Jordan, and whatnot. And at some point, the Banu Lakhm, who are also Christian, like the Banu Ghassan, they also begin to have some conflicts with the Persian Empire. The Sassanian monarchs, they had different styles of leadership that it gets into. They had some separatist religions, and even in the Islamic era, in the 600s and 700s, when the Umayyad dynasty, Banu Umayyah, and the Abbasid dynasty, Khilaf al-Abbasiyya, in the 600s and 700s, when they controlled Iraq and Iran, and they conquered the Persian Empire, you still had some religious revolt. You still had some kind of religious separatist movements in the Islamic empires in the 600s and 700s associated with the Zoroastrian religion. So it says here the Mazdakite movement. Some of the separatist movements, I think they began to mix elements of Islamic culture with ancient Persian culture. Khusro Anushirvan, this is a particular ruler who came to rule in the 530s, and it just talks about some of the problems that they were dealing with in the 500s, urban life and institutions, but it's also mentioned indicating that the Sassanian Empire, where the cities were running into some trouble here. If the towns were not important, the aristocracy was. The aristocracy, the rulers were divided into many different classes. Some people think that the way the class system worked in the Sassanian Empire, that may have facilitated the process of many Iranians becoming Muslim from the lower social classes. Unlike the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, the Sassanian like the Eastern Romans, the Sassanians had a state religion, Zoroastrianism, administered by a caste of priests. But again, much of the population was not following the ruling religion. Islam came into contact with a rapidly changing society. So the idea here is that the Islamic empires are taking over these regions, Roman Syria, Eastern Roman Egypt, and Sassanian Iran and Iraq, that had been the frontier regions between these two empires, and there was some urban decline associated with things like health issues and then infrastructure problems, floods, earthquakes, and this appears to have facilitated the process of the northern Arabic-speaking trade routes going up into Syria, Syrian Palmyra, Jordanian city of Petra. Appears that the decline of these Eastern Roman cities, Eastern Roman Syria, Persian Iraq, this urban decline appears to have facilitated the process of the Arabic-speaking empires in the 600s, in collaboration with some of the Banu Ghassan and Banu Lakhm, taking over Syria, Egypt, and Iraq and Iran. Great. Let's hit this thing.